Well, welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance for a global audience. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damien. How are you?
Very well. Are you going to any of these, or been to any of these concerts in Mexico? Bad Bunny, I think today, as we record, is starting the first of 8 full days. I think it's there. Mexico City is the place with the most Bad Bunny concerts in the world, I read today.
I wish I had gone to Dua Lipa, to be honest, but I did not. Bad Bunny is, my kids are going. I'm going to a different concert, Damien. That's on Friday. I'm going to see Copeland, the former police member, and an orchestra play at Sala Nezahualcóyotl. That should be fun.
Okay, maybe not quite the same as Bad Bunny.
Not quite the same as Bad Bunny. I'm not up there, but I'm making my way up.
Yeah, I didn't get to see Dua Lipa. She opened a taco store in Condesa near where you live. Did you see that?
I took a photo, not of her. I wish I had seen her, of the taqueria. Yeah, it was a bit crowded at some times during the day, and it's gone now.
And did you follow the Nepo scandal with at the Dua Lipa concert?
No, what happened there?
Well, there was a daughter of a famous Mexican film director kind of opened the concert and wasn't especially well received. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Dua Lipa was a spectacular concert. So this week we have 2 great interviews on very different subjects. Jaime Guillen of MIP. MIP is by now Mexico's largest infrastructure fund. It's historically kept a pretty low profile, but Jaime opens up, maybe for the first time, on some of the factors driving its phenomenal growth, and also its plans to expand in new asset classes, industrial real estate, and also new geographies into Europe and the US. We also talked to Bruce Boren. Bruce is one of the 3 founding partners of 3 Media, which is a production company here in Mexico City and Buenos Aires. And they produced the hugely successful biopic Chespirito, probably the most successful show on a streaming platform for Latin America this year, number 1 in all the key Latin American markets. He's going to talk a little bit about that and also share some of his thinking on the battle for Warner Brothers, which obviously owns HBO between Netflix and Paramount, and what that might mean for Mexico. So try and wait and listen to them. And then, Eduardo, you and I will, as usual, dissect some of the big stories. I've got Alsea getting the Raising Cane franchise here in Mexico. Next year, I'm planning to open their first Raising Cane restaurant. And more rumors on Televisa's potential purchase of AT&T Mexico, the mobile company here. So why don't we kick off with you, Eduardo? What do you have for us?
On my end, I'll talk a little bit about the inflation number that came out yesterday, if I recall correctly. That was a bit higher than expected. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Stellantis having some good news on production lines of vehicles in Mexico and bringing in a new brand of Chinese cars, interestingly enough. So why don't I kick off with the inflation number, Damien, and then we'll go to Alsea, which I think we had a little bit of a preview that they were going to go into the chicken segment in an interview that we did long ago. So it's finally materialized. But anyway, on the inflation number, prices in Mexico accelerated at a faster rate than most economists were anticipating for the month of November, leaving now the inflation rate for the year at 3.8%, 0.3 percentage points higher than the one in October. The number wasn't expected to be so high, but nevertheless, nobody's really throwing their hats or making a big thing out of it. The interesting thing is how will this might impact the decision that the central bank will take on interest rates next Thursday. At the current moment, most economists expect the rates to come down again. from the 7.25% level that they are, and the central bank will likely bring them down to 7. The inflation accelerated and might make a few members of the board a little bit more worried, in addition to Jonathan Heath, who's always been a little bit more hawkish on bringing rates down. Nevertheless, with the decision that the Fed took a few hours ago on this Wednesday, bringing rates in the States a quarter of percentage points, most people anticipate that the central bank will not have any problems cutting rates again, but that might be a last cut before we get a better sense of where prices are heading in Mexico in the no so distant future. That we review the salary increases of next year that might bring pressure on costs and may be reflected in prices later on during the year. So I think the central bank will take a wait and see approach at the beginning of 2026, maybe later this year. Any comments on your end, Damien?
Well, I think the cut by the Fed and the generally sort of dovish sentiment by the Fed means that the central bank, notwithstanding the higher inflation numbers, will continue to cut here, but to keep the spread, the difference between Mexico and the U.S. no higher than where it is. Also, the peso at 18.20 has been very strong, and that's and also probably a factor in them able to cut rates. The economy's very weak, leaving aside the inflation pressures. Probably going to get sort of 0.5 or less % growth this year. So, and we're starting off with much higher real rates in Mexico than most other places. So I think all of that is going to contribute to continued cuts by the central bank. You probably saw that the Congress finally passing this increase in tariffs on products from countries that Mexico doesn't have free trade agreements with. That's mainly China, Vietnam, Brazil, some countries of Russia where Mexico doesn't have any kind of trade agreement. Now, interestingly, there was quite a lot of pushback from the private sector who imports from China, saying this is going to raise their input costs. And in the end, what I read in Bloomberg, I haven't been able to go through the actual legislation yet. Of the 1,400 products that were going to get tariff increases, about 300 were exempted. These tariff increases are anywhere from 25 to 50% tariff on these products, and so if that's correct, then that means 1,100 products will see these pretty steep tariff increases, but not as much as had been feared. The sectors where the tariff increases will go through, among others, are clothing, footwear, steel and aluminium, auto parts, basically areas where Mexico has its own local industry, and the local producers of these goods obviously delighted to put tariffs on these mostly Asian competitors that they face. I think there's some hope that Mexico, by towing the U.S. line on this, clearly there was U.S. pressure to do this, that the U.S. tariffs on Mexican steel and aluminium, which have gone up significantly, Mexico would get some kind of exemption from that in return for this sort of delivering on mostly Chinese tariffs barriers. So we'll see if that actually happens. If so, then there'll be relief in the Mexican steel sector, which has been hit hard by these U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, we had reviewed the decision by Mexico to raise those tariffs on countries with whom we don't have a free trade agreement. I'm glad to hear that there were some exemptions. I don't know if they must have reviewed it with greater detail and less of a broad brush to just put tariffs on everything. The sectors that mainly needed it in terms of protecting local industries were those that you mentioned. So we'll have to wait and see how it impacts or helps them, and whether that will also raise a little bit of pressure on the inflation front. But like you said, the Mexican economy it's not performing as well as it can. So even though the central bank has one mandate, obviously it's in the back of a lot of people's minds when decisions on rates come to the forefront. So we'll have a cut probably next week, and then we'll wait and see what happens.
So moving on, Alsea, which, as you mentioned, part of this program, the company, they announced a development agreement with Raising Cane, which is a quick service restaurant brand in the US. Have you ever been there?
I haven't tried those ones. No, have you?
Well, anyways, it's a very small menu, sort of chicken fingers, fries, toast, coleslaw, and sauce. Basically, chicken fingers from the protein perspective. Very, very simple. Ultra high output. They have very high, in the US at least, very high unit volumes. I think 6.6 million per restaurant per year. So one of the highest, I think it's the second highest to Chick-fil-A's. And they will obviously be charging a royalty to Alsea for using their brand and their know-how. And it's we saw that earlier this year. And they talked about it on the podcast. Alsea, is announced that they're going to be bringing Chipotle next year. So these are two sort of very successful brands that they're going to be bringing. And meanwhile, they've been cutting back on some other brands. They sold last year their Burger Kings in Spain, which weren't, I think, doing that well. They're also exiting TGI Friday in Spain, and then in Chile, they recently announced selling Chili's there. And so there's a kind of reaccommodation of the Alsea portfolio, I guess, going after kind of younger customers, trendier customers, newer concept, being kind of, being fresh, because, some of these older brands that they were running were probably around where you and I were teenagers, and may not be quite as appealing to our kids or to the Gen Zs of this world. And I think the market overall is kind of happy that they're moving into these, higher value added brands and getting rid of some of the less successful ones, and especially in smaller countries like Chile. They've faced some problems in Chile with labor, on labor issues.
Yeah, we heard here, I think, Damien, that Alsea wanted to get into the chicken fast food play. I out of camera, I asked, I dropped a few names. I didn't got this one, by the way. But yeah, they want to compete with Popeyes, which just is a brand new brand here of Mexico of chicken protein products, and KFC, which has been here for many years, since I was even a young kid. So it's Alsea never ceases to entertain us in the sense of introducing new brands to its Mexico's public. Good for them. It's still a long way to see how it all comes about. But I think for 2025, Chipotle and Cane will be the highlights of their acquisition proposal. And we'll have to go to the restaurant and try to tie this chicken fingers thing one day.
Nice. Maybe we should broadcast from there. Well, actually, just a plug for our sister podcast. Susanna Sainz from White Paper has a great 3-part podcast on Alsea's history. Explains the Torrado family founding Alsea, the expansion into new brands like Starbucks, which was a game changer. Then the impact of COVID, and then how the company was able to turn itself around after that, after those huge challenges. So great podcast, which I recommend. So moving on, Eduardo, this rumor that's been circulating that we've commented on before once again became a kind of center of market attention this week, which is Televisa, Grupo Televisa, buying AT&T Mexico, specifically its mobile business. Now, if this is confirmed, Televisa stock has responded quite positively to this development, even as Fitch downgraded its debt to junk following Moody's that already had it at junk because of balance sheet pressures at the company and also at Televisa Univision, which it owns I think about 45% of. it would be quite interesting if it happens, because I don't know if you remember, Televisa originally owned 50% of Usercell, which it bought from Ricardo Salinas, from Grupo Salinas, who stayed with 50%. Then they sold it to Salinas at a loss. Then Salinas then went and flipped the 100% of Usercell to AT&T. Televisa wasn't probably not too happy about selling at a loss, and then seeing Ricardo Salinas resell it in a very short period of time. That stake plus the stake that he had for this huge gain, so he got the upper hand in that one. So, and that was more than 10 years ago. So if this is confirmed, then they would be going back into a business that has cost them a fair amount of money in the past. Now, if they bought it, they'd be getting about 24 million mobile subscribers, which is about a 17% market share. It would triple Grupo Televisa's revenues, their consolidated revenue. So it's much bigger than their Izzy cable business and internet business, and it would double the EBITDA, and it would give Izzy, which is the name, as you know, of their telecom business and their broadband business, it would give them triple play. It would give them broadband, pay TV, and mobile. And in theory, at least, that would give them, some benefits over their current situation, which is, they'd be able to sort of amortize acquisition costs over different products, might have lower churn because people sort of would get everything from them. They could share billing and service costs, might improve retention. So, there's a certain logic which the market might like. Now, AT&T has actually been doing much better over the last couple of years. It generated last year in 2024 about almost $700 million of EBITDA. It's had now 7 straight quarters of operating profit. Last year, I think its operating profit, its EBITDA was up about 20%. So the business is much healthier than it was when at one point it had negative EBITDA despite all the capex. But there are reasons why they're selling. I guess it's relatively small for AT&T. I think it's second to Telcel, which has probably 65% of the market. So it's very distant second in a business where scale matters so much. Being a distant second, it's difficult to be profitable. AT&T has been very vocal about how high spectrum fees are in Mexico. At one point, they said they weren't going to buy new spectrum. Then they said maybe they will, but they're claiming that spectrum fees are double in Mexico. Now, that's also such a big issue for Telcel because it's got much more revenues to amortize those spectrum costs over. But when you're the smaller player, it's a much bigger problem. And now you've had these MVNOs, these virtual mobile operators, most notably Byte from Walmart, which is almost the same size now as AT&T, and it's overtaken Telefonica, which is also for sale according to the company itself. And they've come in and kind of undercut prices using the distribution of the retail arm of Walmart, and also getting cheap spectrum from government-owned Altum Redis. So you've got the problem of spectrum, you've got the problem of competition. And now the government, I don't know if you've been following this, Eduardo, but they're requiring everyone to give an ID, an official ID, to get a phone line, like a CUP or an RFC. And the industry that is saying that's going to cost like $200 million. I wonder if it will actually, pan out. I think it's going to be quite, especially in more rural and poorer parts of Mexico, it might be quite challenging to do that. So that's going to be, a big challenge, getting everyone's ID before, and if you don't have an official ID and tax number, or then apparently your phone will stop working, and all of that's got to happen in 3 or 4 months. And we're talking about 150 million phone lines, so it's a massive undertaking in a very short period of time. Probably not the main reason why AT&T is selling, but it certainly doesn't kind of contribute to profitable business from their perspective. Now, the problem Televisa has, obviously, as I mentioned, Fitch just downgraded the debt to junk. It's got quite a lot of problems, which are not really of its own making, not entirely of its own making, with the streamers eating into its market share at the television business, which they own 45% of, which is hurting that. And then Izzy hasn't been doing well against Telmex and against Telcel, against América Móvil, and they have a lot of debt due to acquisitions in the past. They also bought Sky, the minority stake in Sky that they didn't own from AT&T, and then Sky is also doing very, very poorly, even if they paid not very much for that. So the issue is where they're going to get the money from. I think there's two possibilities without knowing anything. One is they do a capital increase, and you've got two sort of billionaire Mexicans that have recently gone into Televisa. David Martinez from FinTech owns about 7-8% of it, and Tricio from Lala has just bought a big chunk of Televisa. So maybe they do a rights issue and they would subscribe, and you'd strengthen the balance sheet to buy AT&T, which makes a lot of industrial logic. Or the other possibility is that you recapitalize at the ISI level, and people like Martinez, who owns big many things. He owns a big telecom company in Argentina, so telecom, which has some expertise in. So they recapitalized the telco subsidiary to make this acquisition. But I think it would be a bit of a stretch to buy AT&T itself, unless AT&T at the US level gives the financing to Televisa, which is another possibility. A bit of a stretch to do it. But even if they get the financing, they fix their balance sheet issues, then they have to make it a success. And that will be interesting because although it's improved a lot, it's still a lot of capital expenditure required to compete with Telcel, which is so dominant. I mean, someone told me, and this is third hand, so take it perhaps with a grain of salt, that Carlos Slim was asked by an investor if he was the most powerful businessman in Mexico, and he laughed and said, "No, Bernardo Gomez is the most powerful businessman in Mexico." So if there's one business group led by Bernardo and by Alfonso Goitia and obviously Emilio Escarga that could sort of have the political muscle to compete with the Slim-controlled América Móvil, it would be Grupo Televisa. But as we've seen, Televisa stock's obviously done very poorly. Having political muscle doesn't mean you're running a company successfully. So it's not just being able to get good regulations through, but it's also about running the business and taking the right decisions. So it's quite a lot to digest, and it's not even confirmed yet, but it will be quite a significant transaction. And today, as we speak, Televisa stock was up another 7% despite the Fitch downgrade of the debt. So definitely, people are speculating that there's going to be something that is positive for the company. And my guess is if there is something, it's going to be combined with a capital increase either at the holding level or at the telco level, because otherwise it would be quite a stretch on their balance sheet.
What a way for Slim to really get off the money from his back by saying that someone else is the most powerful businessman in the country. Brilliant. Once again, and if we've learned anything from the way he has operated before Telmex and later on América Móvil or Turcell, is that he's a tough businessman to crack. I mean, they've been facing competition now. I mean, real competition since 2013, 2014, and they still have 65% of the market. That's why maybe AT&T is throwing down the towel. Probably, I don't know if that's the case. They were partners and they became rivals, and now AT&T has said, "I'm out." We'll see if Televisa, I mean, of all the people, there are the ones that have the connections and the political power to try to change things. And now that we don't have a very autonomous, at least legally, entity, we'll see whether they can capture things their own way. But the other guy's not a fighter that will not put a fight in those terms as well. So hopefully it's for the good of everybody that uses telecom services in this country, and that they can grow and expand and keep the rates at international levels.
Yeah, but if it's confirmed, then we have to see. You have Citi throwing in the towel and selling to Fernando Chico. Fernando Chico, as everyone will remember, worked with Carlos Slim in Bursa, his brother, Jaime Chico, his older brother, was the CEO of Telmex when Slim took it over. So, and now you have, potentially at least AT&T be taken over by Televisa. So some of these big, Telefónica's also for sale. Apparently, according to the company itself in its recent investor day, you're seeing quite a lot of these global companies like throw in the towel and say, I can't compete here against the local billionaires. And it may not, it's easy to say that, the rules of the game are organized in a way skewed against the foreigners, but and there's clearly some element of truth in that. But I also think that, these big multinationals in many cases, not in every case, struggle to compete when it comes to cost management, the right capex decision, moving fast. Sometimes they can, being run out of New York or wherever it might be, they can be slow and bureaucratic. So there's different explanations. I think it'd be a mistake to blame it entirely on political power, political influence, or the rules of the game. It's also knowing how to manage in a local environment.
Yeah, how to play the rules of Mexico. It's also, we see it on the banking sector. I think Citibank was not the best manager of the Banamex franchise. BBVA, which is not Mexican, is doing extremely well. Santander is not complaining, I hear. So yeah, you're right. It's part of it could be, but it's also playing the cards that you're dealt with in the way that you should, or even being creative to satisfy the consumers' needs in the country. Walmart has done very well. And so it goes both ways, I think. If you don't mind, Damien, just a bit of positive news on the auto sector that has been a little bit on the pouring end of the spectrum. We know that up to November, production of vehicles in Mexico has fallen 1.5%. Exports fell 1.6% up to November, and sales here almost grew nothing, 1%. So, but despite that, a few days ago, I think Stellantis gave us a bit of good news in terms of announcing that they will produce the Ram pickup truck 1500 that competes against the Silverado from Chevrolet at its Ramos Arizpe plant up in Coahuila, next to Saltillo, while they will also will be fabricating the Cherokee hybrid, a sixth generation of that vehicle, at its Toluca plant, and they will be manufacturing a new electrical vehicle there that is called Recon, which is add up to the Compass and the Wagoneer S vehicles that are producer and are EV. So it's good news overall in the sense that Mexico is still being an attractive place for manufacturing vehicles, not just engine combustion, but EVs, which is, despite probably what the U.S. administration thinks, the way that the future holds, either be fully electrical or hybrids. So those were new announcements. And at the same time, Stellantis reached an agreement with a production company from China that has the brand called Leap Motor to bring 13 vehicles into the Mexican market, from small SUVs to compact SUVs to fully large SUVs. So there will be a new brand popping up in Mexico in the next few months. So again, signs that my announcement of my death has been extremely exaggerated. The auto sector, not that it's going through a rosy time, but that it's still kicking and may kick even further once the USMCA hopefully gets renewed and the tariffs get settled and the whole system of trading between the three nations, Canada, Mexico, and the US, is much more clear in the future. So a little bit of good news on that end, Damien.
That's great. Let's hope, as I'm sure we will, the Trump's latest tariff threat of 5%, very low by his standards, Normally it's like 50.
Yeah. That shows how much he has reversed himself. I mean, I did a piece about how he has brought down a quarter of all his tariffs. So there you go. He's now even threatening a 5% tariff, and due to water, right? That was
Yeah,
the
so
latest.
this is the water treaty that we actually had a woman academic to talk about that water treaty a while ago. And Mexico, because of the droughts, not this year, but last year and the year before, hasn't handed over the water that it's meant to hand over. And Mexico's saying that there's sort of force majeure when there are droughts. They don't have to hand over the water in any kind of quick time frame, at least. And the US saying we want our water, and Trump is kind of saying, well, if you don't hand over the water, I'm going to put a 5% tariff, which is, everyone's like scratching their head saying, where does he come across this one? But anyway, I think people have kind of got bored of Trump's tariff threats at this point. So there we are. Let's move to the interviews with Jaime, which I think it's going to be very, very interesting, and Bruce on the Chespirito. Today, we're joined by Jaime Guillen. Jaime is a partner at MIP, Mexico Infrastructure Partners. At this point, I think it's Mexico's most important and largest infrastructure investment fund. Jaime is originally a nuclear engineer. He graduated from MIT. He began his career working with the U.S. government as a nuclear engineer, and he later became a managing director at Bechtel, the global infrastructure company. And for the past 11 years, he's been a partner and a key figure at MIP, helping shape some of the country's largest and most important infrastructure transactions, including the landmark transaction last year of Iberdrola's power assets. How are you today, Jaime?
Thank you, Damien. Doing well. So in London at the moment, so it's dark and rainy. So it's par for the course.
Okay. Well, send my regards to my hometown. We have a Mexican in London and a Londoner in Mexico. The world of globalization, I guess. Well, Jaime, until recently, MIP, I think it's fair to say, has had a relatively low profile, deliberately so. Maybe we could just kick off by explaining to us MIP's scale, its portfolio, assets under management, the sectors that you're in across transportation, energy, water, so that our listeners have a sense of what MIP is for those that are not that familiar with you.
Okay. No, yes, definitely. So, I mean, we started in 2012. We formed in 2012. Took us 2 years to actually raise our first fund of about 200 million in 2014. And then we've actually raised capital, I believe, every single year since then. Our capital has come primarily from the Afores and other Latin American institutional investors, which is a different strategy than I think most other asset managers had pursued up until that point, where most of our competitors raised capital internationally and then invested in places like Mexico, Brazil, and other Latin American countries. And our focus was, to actually create a dominant sort of local manager. That was actually our plan from the beginning. Obviously, easier said than done. It took a while to actually get to the scale that we wanted to get at the beginning, but we did start with a team that actually had global experience. You mentioned my experience in the US, but I also have experience in Europe and Asia, as well as some of my partners. So, we took some of that experience and tried to bring it to Mexico. So we looked at what other sort of big asset managers were doing in other parts of the world, and we said, look, this is something that should work in Mexico, because the Afores were starting to invest in alternatives. And so we grew with that idea in mind that we wanted to be what others had already done in other parts of the world. And we grew really with the Afores. When we started, the Afores were not really investing in alternatives being real estate, private equity, and infrastructure. But, again, through our own process of educating them, other, asset managers educating them, they started investing more. And at the same time, they were growing. As a result, we, like I said, grown with them. And now we have a portfolio. I said we started with 200 million. We now have a portfolio that's nearing 6.4 billion US dollars in equity, and about 13.5 billion if you include the debt. And our key sectors that we're invested in is energy or electricity. And we're talking thermal, we're talking renewable, and within renewable we have solar, we have wind. We're also in transportation, we're in ports, we're in airports, we're in toll roads, we're in water, transport and treatment of water. We're in telecommunications, we're in fiber, we're in towers, edge data centers, and also in facilities management. We actually manage 2 large prisons in Mexico from a facilities management perspective. So, our experience is across the spectrum of infrastructure. And we see that there's still a lot more to be done. I mean, Mexico is a growing country. It's a large economy, and we still see many opportunities ahead.
Jaime, you're maybe best known right now, at least, for the Iberdrola transaction. Maybe can you just walk us through a little bit how that transaction came into place? How long were the discussions, and how is it working out? Maybe a year later, is it now fully under your control? Have you made any substantial differences or changes to the assets?
Yes, I mean, for those listeners that aren't familiar with the transaction, so in 2024, so last year, the beginning of last year, we acquired 12 thermal power plants from Iberdrola and 1 wind asset for a total transaction value of $6.2 billion US. So, one of the largest transactions done in Mexico. And it was something that, didn't happen sort of overnight. I think, door to door, it probably took, close to 24 months for this to come to fruition. And it was not a straight line. We knew what everyone else in the market knew, which is that the government wanted to, leverage its capital to invest more in energy infrastructure. We also knew that they had a dispute with Iberdrola in Mexico. But we also knew that Iberdrola, of Mexico was an important market for them. So we weren't quite sure what they were planning to do, given that it was such an important market. Other investors were interested in investing in the sector, but the sector was really not moving because, when you have such a public dispute going on in the marketplace, investors get concerned and simply do not invest. And so, we looked at that whole situation and said, is there a way to actually bring sort of the different parties together and find a solution that works? Because, electricity is a large part of the investment, market in Mexico. And when people are not investing in one of the largest sectors, that's a problem for the country. That's a problem, for the growth of the country. And so, we wanted to do a transaction, but we also wanted to solve a problem that we saw in the market. And through shuttle diplomacy, I think it was about 13 months of many flights, many meetings with Iberdrola, with the government, with lenders, with the Afores. We kind of came, we put together a structure that worked for everyone. I mean, the government wanted certain things. The Afores needed to, have certain governance. Iberdrola wanted a fair price, and they wanted also certainty of execution. And the lenders, wanted to make sure that this was a business that was obviously viable and could service, the large amount of debt that we were going to have to raise. And in the end, we were able to pull it off. But like I said, it's not easy. It took a long time, and finally came together at the beginning of last year. And then since then, to the second part of your question, the transition has gone actually quite well. So 12 months later, we were able to take complete control of the operations. Iberdrola was providing transition services in the first year. We initially anticipated it would be much longer, but Quantum Energia, which was our operating platform, was able to actually take control of those assets, within a year. The performance has been good. We have had to make additional investments. But some of that was just the natural process of us identifying ways to improve the efficiency, improve the performance, and we're starting to see, some of that flowing through the latest results in the operations of the company. So we're very pleased with it. We plan to grow that platform. It has now been listed as a fibra. So, with the idea that this is now an evergreen platform where we can actually add additional investments and grow that platform from the 8.5 gigawatts that it has to perhaps 10, 12 gigawatts in the next few years.
So some people at the time said it was an expensive transaction, given that some of the assets at least were quite old. How do you respond to that to that line of questioning?
I mean, we did quite a bit of analysis in terms of the plants themselves. But look, I mean, you value the contracts, you value the assets, but you also value the opportunity that you have to actually grow or expand those assets. And I can tell you what we've identified since acquiring the facilities is opportunities to actually expand, extend contracts, and when you kind of take all that into account, it was not expensive. And in fact, if you look at what others in the market are paying for comparable generating assets, this was actually quite a competitive and attractive investment.
Jaime, on that front, some people also said when the transaction was announced that you were forcing the Afores to invest with you. How much is that true or not? And the government also sold the idea that they had nationalized those plants when it was a private equity fund which acquired them. How do you cope with that narrative from the officials that announced the deal when it happened?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the Afores invest in this sector. So this is not something that a sector that's not known to them. So, they made the decision to actually come into the transaction because it sort of met their criteria and their objectives and the return perspective. So, I mean, I think the decision that they took was each independent, and I think each of them saw what the opportunity was. In terms of, the government actually, having control, they do have the majority of the equity in the transaction, but that was part of the discussion and negotiation. The Afores and any future investors in the company or the platform, want to make sure that there is no interference and there's clear governance as to how this is going to get operated. What happened in this transaction is not any different what has happened in other parts of the world where you have the private sector and governments coexisting in investments, whether it's France, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Germany. I mean, I think, here there's a lot of focus on it, but, you have, government investment in a lot of critical industries in many parts of the world.
In that sense, Mexico needs a lot of energy, needs a lot of electricity. You're talking about growing the platform. What is the regulatory framework for you to do so? And are you enthusiastic about the rules of the game looking forward?
So, I mean, the rules are being clarified. I mean, I think I would be fair to say that I think us, like other investors, are still looking for that additional clarity. But there is work by government, and the feedback we're getting from our discussions from government is that they know that they need to clarify some of these rules so that they can encourage the continued private investment in the sector. There's a lot of interest in investors, international investors, wanting to come into Mexico. As I said, it's a large sort of economy. It's 1.85 trillion or so dollars. I mean, we're talking about the same scale as as Spain or South Korea or Australia, and it wants to receive more investment, but some of it needs to be clarified in terms of the rule. I think on the under 20 megawatts, I think there's clarity in terms of what the rules are, but in terms of above 20 megawatts, I think we're still looking for that additional clarity, which the government has not issued, and that we, like other investors, are waiting for.
Just waiting, or they do ask a little bit of feedback from you guys as private investors?
No, I mean, they ask us and they ask other investors, what the private sector is looking for, and I think they've received that feedback. And again, they're just considering it and determining how best to come out with something that functions.
Any other areas that you're looking at for clarification in the terms of the new administration for you to invest, be it
like you said, toll roads, sprains now that are a big issue here in Mexico.
No, I mean, I think, most of the other sectors, in the transport sector, in the toll road, that's always been an active market. I think, there we're just waiting to see what new projects the government is going to come out with, either new concessions or for them to define how to do perhaps extensions or expansions of existing toll roads. Because again, we see the traffic increase, we see the need for more transportation links, and they need them, right? I mean, not only because of the growth of vehicles on the road, but as the trend for nearshoring and friendshoring, continuing, they will need to make sure that you have the right sort of logistical network for especially the heavy vehicles, for example. And on the ports, the same side. I mean, I think there's a need for expansion at the ports. There is congestion at the ports, again, driven by the fact that Mexico is still benefiting from that, friendshoring and nearshoring that's continuing to happen. And then telecom, both, towers and digital, we're seeing a huge growth in the demand for, telecommunication, volumes, whether it's wireless or digital.
Jaime, you're a nuclear engineer. What's your view on small modular reactors? Are they viable for Mexico to meet the coming energy demand related to data centers and other energy requirements?
The small nuclear reactors have a place, but and just one clarification. I mean, they've been around for, I think, as long as I've been around. So it's not a new technology. I mean, I think people assume that it's something new. It's not. It's been around about 60 years. I think the issue is, can you get the cost to a price point that makes sense for certain industries? And I would say that for many industries, the price point is still high. For being part of a system, for being baseload or being backup, it could work. Because capacity payments for anything that is standby tends to be high. Or data centers that need, green, reliable baseload, power. Then there's the issue of, the regulatory permitting. Everyone's talking about the cost, but the permitting has not been fully addressed. I mean, no one's permitted one in its entirety. It should be easier to permit, but at the end of the day, you still have to go through the same analysis of a large power plant or a small power plant. And that is, the what ifs of the different scenarios that the regulator, will require you to go through. So, I mean, I think, in terms of the time to market, I think it's, there's a lot of money going in. There's a lot of, new modern technologies of the same concept, but just modern technologies. And I think they will have a use. But I don't think there's one coming to Mexico anytime soon.
Understood. You mentioned, Jaime, at the beginning that you, from the get-go, grew with Afores in Mexico. But to continue growing in and out of Mexico, my guess is you're going to need a higher mix of non-Afore money or international capital, given that the Afores have risk limits, concentration limits with any one player. And as MIP has become quite a big part of their portfolio, it's going to be difficult to maintain the growth that you've had, relying only on or mainly on Afores. How do you see international capital appetite for infrastructure in Mexico?
As I said, a few minutes ago, I mean, there's actually quite a bit of interest by international investors to invest in Mexico. I think, what they want is, usually scale. So, I mean, they want larger projects. And then they want what they want in every market, right? They want a structure that makes sense, risk reward that's properly balanced, regulatory or, contractual certainty. And then, a fair return for the risk that they perceive. In terms of, for us, you're absolutely right, Damien, that, we have to look for additional capital beyond the Afores. Not only because they have certain sort of limits that they might hit here and then, but also just, because I think, for Mexico, you can't rely only on the Afores to actually fund the infrastructure needs, right? As I said earlier, I mean, the economy of Mexico is roughly 1.85 trillion. Rule of thumb, they should be spending about 3% on infrastructure investments. That's 50 or 60 billion annually. The Afores don't have that much capital to invest. Again, just for portfolio reasons, because even if they invested all of their capital, it's still not enough. But from a regulatory and exposure perspective, that's not enough, right? And so you need that international capital, and so we need to be able to access that international capital for Mexico and pair it with local capital. I mean, I think that's, to us, is the best formula. The local capital understands, the risks, understands the market better. International investor wants to see, or gets comfort in seeing another investor, alongside them who is local. So we think that's kind of a natural. And then for us as well, we want to actually grow. I mean, we've started in Mexico. We moved down to Latin America, South America. And we are now looking at investments in the United States and even Spain, which to us are natural markets, not only because of their ties to Mexico, but also because many of us on the team have actually worked in the U.S., worked in Europe, worked in Spain. So we know those markets, we know the players, we understand it. So it's a natural evolution for us, and for that, we need international capital. The Afores are already there. They actually invest through other managers and may support us as well, but we ourselves will need to attract other international capital as well.
And would you be interested in working with other global sort of infrastructure funds, like sort of Blackstone's, inviting them to be a sort of shareholder in the GP structure, or are your goal is to work mostly alone and only on a project by project basis with other funds?
On a project by project basis, but the reason for that, Damien, is that to us, one of the advantages that we believe we have as MIP is our ability to actually move quickly and swiftly when we see an opportunity, and to actually brainstorm ideas. And I think one of the weaknesses that we see in the big global managers, besides the fact that they fly in and out and may not know or understand the situation locally as well, it's just their cycle for making a decision. Sometimes their people on the ground know what to do, but sometimes it's got to go to New York, London, somewhere in Asia, before they can make a decision, and a committee has to convene, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they have a feedback. Whereas, we can actually make, those decisions quite quickly. We go through our process, but, it might take us 1 or 2 days to actually go through our process, because we're all, mostly together. Or it's a team that's quite small and independent that can make those decisions. So we think that's actually an advantage for us. And so having someone in our shareholder structure that's a big global organization just doesn't fit with the way we operate. So on a project by project basis, we do talk to them. We look at projects together. We haven't really done much with some of the big players. But we have, for example, in the telecom sector, we're partnered with Ardian, which is the big global French manager, where we're 50%, co-investors in that platform.
And would you be interested in moving into real assets, logistics, industrial real estate, digital infrastructure platforms, or are you going to stick to your current sectors?
So we're already in sort of digital through MXT, that joint venture with Ardian, and then industrial real estate is a sector that we are moving into. We actually have a team now that's actually raising capital for deploying capital into that sector, and that was again one of those sort of evolutionary things where we were being approached by a number of large international real estate investors that needed an energy solution, needed a telecom solution, a water solution, and local small developers weren't basically performing or providing them what they needed. For us, these are smaller projects, 5, 10, maybe 15 million US dollars. But at the same time, we saw that if you were able to actually connect them with electricity or water, or provide them the digital interconnection, then you're creating a lot of value for the land. What happened in the industrial real estate sector in Mexico is that a lot of the low-hanging fruit, those plots of land that were near all of the services and transport links were taken up and developed. And now, where the development is going is to new areas where there's less energy and infrastructure. So, looking at the whole market, we thought, well, if we're going to bring value, we want to be on both sides, not only on the infrastructure side, but also on the industrial real estate side. And so we've brought in capabilities that can develop and manage industrial real estate assets. And in fact, we're doing an investment already outside of the closing of the fund, and then we'll do additional investments once the fund is closed.
So I mean, in that sense, 2025 is coming to an end. How does 2026 look for you, for MIP? What's the pipeline like? What products, what projects, what countries are you looking at closely right now?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at some expansions of our existing platform. So we've got some growth opportunities in our airports platform, in our toll road platform. In fact, we announced and we expect to close very shortly the acquisition of one toll road in our portfolio. And then we're also looking at some acquisitions of some energy assets on the renewable side. Those haven't not been announced, but we are working quite diligently and hope to actually make an announcement, perhaps not before the end of the year, but shortly after in the new year. And then, as I mentioned, we will be also hopefully announcing, our initiatives in the industrial real estate sector quite soon.
All those are for Mexico, is that right?
So some, mostly Mexico, but some of them are outside of Mexico as well. So.
And one last question, Jaime, on my end. I know that distribution and transmission of energy in Mexico, electricity mainly, it's a bottleneck. Are there any chances there that your expertise could help the government or convince the government that that area is also one that might require or may be helped by private equity?
Eduardo, you're asking a very good and complicated question. Complicated from the perspective that transmission is reserved for the state. Yeah, and it's not as easy of just bringing in sort of private capital. I mean, the whole system is interconnected. So how it's going to work, what the role of the private sector is going to be, and how it's going to work is a little more complicated. I mean, I think the government has tried before. Investors weren't quite happy with the model, and we haven't seen something that works yet for investors. It's an area that we're looking at, but since it tends to be a game more for bigger utilities, we may partner with someone, or may invest along some other experienced investors in transmission line.
Yeah, and there needs to be some probably legal changes as well.
Yes, no, that's assuming all that gets done.
That happens, yeah.
Yeah. So, but it is one of the big challenges for Mexico right now, and it's actually not only Mexico. I mean, we're seeing that in Ireland, we're seeing here in the UK, we're seeing it in Spain, we're seeing it in the US. So, and again, it's just something that's happened over time as you get more intermittent, sources of supply, which is like solar and other renewables. And then at the same time, you've got users like data centers, which also fluctuate in their demand quite significantly. So input and output are both fluctuating. So the system itself actually has to, manage that instability of the system.
Well, let's see where the future takes us, Jaime. Thank you very much for spending some time and letting us know what MIP is up to and how it's doing. It's a fascinating sector, without a doubt, and you've broken ground in Mexico in several projects. So let's keep the conversation going in the future.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you.
Well, today's guest is someone who helped bring one of Mexico's and Latin America's most beloved icons back into the spotlight. Bruce Boren, who's a partner at 3 Media Group, is a producer behind the award-winning Chespirito biopic, streaming on HBO Max. Bruce spent years shaping Mexican media, including top roles at Televisa, and he continues to champion stories that resonate across generations. Bruce, great to have you with us, and thank you for taking time to chat with us.
Nice to be here, guys. Thanks for the space.
So maybe we can start off with Chespirito. I think probably everyone here knows Chespirito means little Shakespeare, as in Shakespeare, Chespirito, and then Chespirito, the little part. Tell us, Bruce, how it came into being, this biopic. Why do you think it resonated so much with the audience, not just in Mexico, but in the United States and across Latin America and no doubt other places as well?
Yeah, I mean, it came to be because it's a biopic that had to be made. It was, I think, probably the most sought after, or there was a lot of expectations as to when there would be a Chespirito biopic. Complicated due to the amount of people involved, the rights, the kind of story that had to be told, and how the story would, sort of mimic real life and some of the stories back from the 70s, 60s, and 70s. So several years in the making. I think in total it was about 6 years to make that biopic. 4 writers' rooms, 2 castings separated by an acquisition and then a pandemic. Well, first the pandemic, then the acquisition of Discovery with HBO and Warner Media. And then finally, when the new team in Warner Media was installed and we came back to the series through the new team, we rewrote the series. The series is probably written, I would say 4 writers' rooms, probably had 2 separate scripts. And we finally got it done, and it was on air in this year, extremely successful. Not to our surprise that there's a lot of expectations for the series, but biopics in general are produced for an older audience, 35 plus. And in this case, not only was the older audience present, but we had a very young audience also. And that's really thanks to social media. So tremendous success. HBO very happy with the results, or we obviously. But it was an interesting journey because you have the original biography of Chespirito called Sin Querer Queriendo, which we translated in English to Not Really on Purpose, which is the current title of the series. And we adapted the biography based not only on what's in the biography, but his other personal writings and stories from the family and stories from the people that represented or played the characters back at the time when the shows were produced, because we're talking about several different shows that were represented in the biopic. So you put together the project with the expectation of the audience, but until the audience decides, you have no idea, what the results will be. So I think that generally encompasses the current state of the project, but the final story hasn't been written yet because there's still people commenting on the biopic, still people watching it worldwide. So we're extremely happy with the current result.
And why wasn't it done on Televisa if presumably they owned a lot of the rights to the Chespirito programs?
I don't know. It's a question you'd have to ask the family. So the family came to us in, I think it was 2019, with the idea of doing a biopic. I think I assume they were speaking to several different parties, and they ended up deciding that they wanted us as their partners. We went out and shopped the idea to several different, I want to say just streamers. I want to call them media companies. And in the end, by far the most interested was Warner Media. So that's where it ended up getting done.
And Televisa was happy to give away the rights, or the family owned the footage?
No, it's 100% the family. I mean, the original scripts and the story, the biography, the trademarks, which Roberto Gómez Bolaños is a trademark, Chespirito is a trademark. and all the characters are trademarks. Those are what the family controls and what was licensed. So given those trademarks and the story that the family owns through the biography that he wrote, that's what the series is based on.
Understood. I mean, right now, we're going through a battle for, as it happens, for Warner Brothers, which owns HBO. You have your own production company now. In the past, you worked with Televisa. I think you were one of the people, if not the person, sort of instrumental behind Televisa's original streaming platform, now known as VIX. Do you think this consolidation, if it happens, which seems very likely, either Paramount or Netflix owning Warner, do you think it has any implications for the Mexican market and what you do at 3 Media?
I mean, we just recently renewed our deal with Warner. So we announced a couple weeks ago that we're going to produce an animated series for them based on Chapulín Colorado, which will be on air very soon on HBO Max and Cartoon Network. In fact, there's already a teaser on their social media about this new series, animated series. And they also announced that we're going to be doing a prequel on Don Ramon, who's a character also from the original cinematic universe of Chespirito. So very popular character, extremely popular in Brazil. So, we're going ahead with new products for them. I know they're producing other stuff. So what happens when all this is said and done? Because, it's anybody's guess, but it seems to me that it's just getting started. So get your bag of popcorn ready and sit back and let's watch it happen. Consolidation is a normal process in any business, especially this one that was so fragmented. That was accelerated by the pandemic, obviously, and I think it's going to be good. Whichever the result is, I mean, we just have to keep plugging away, producing high quality content based on very, very powerful commercial and intellectual property. That there's a lot of that in Latin America, and there's a lot of that is, I don't want to say easily, but definitely potential to be exported worldwide. That's already happened. I mean, Sin Querer Queriendo is the most watched series. It's been produced in Latin America in HBO's history. It's a series that got to #1 in all the countries in Latin America, including Brazil, got to #1 in Spain, got to #1 worldwide. So clearly there's a tremendous amount of power behind these IPs. So whatever happens to the corporate structures of these companies, as long as the customers like myself, and I'm sure both of you, want high quality content and subscribes to these platforms, I think there's going to be market for production of original content, including what we're currently doing and other studios with other IP. So one thing that's clear that's happened over the last decade, maybe more, the quality of the productions that are coming out of Latin America, and particularly Mexico, are going up and up and getting better and better. And I would say are at world class. So I think it's all fantastic.
You seem quite sort of sanguine about this consolidation, but from what I've read in the papers, people in Hollywood are kind of concerned that if Netflix wins this auction, which, so far it's the preferred bidder, obviously, it'll give kind of too much power to one streamer. Maybe they're going to squeeze the margins of production companies because it's going to be kind of Netflix or no one. Is there anything that makes you kind of worried about the consolidation? And then how does Televisa shape up in this? Do you think Televisa Univision becomes an interesting asset? Because, if someone fails to get Warner, because Netflix gobbles it up, or Paramount for that matter, then presumably people are going to say, well, I need to be bigger anyway. What else is left? And Televisa gives you some access to the Hispanic market in the US and Latin America. Or maybe the past due date has already finished for Televisa and people will just work with guys like you? I mean, you've done both things. What's your thinking on that?
Well, that's a multi-tier question. The first part regarding Hollywood, I mean, it's anybody's guess. I mean, I read what you read. I understand there's concern. There always should be concern when these things happen. But at the same time, if you look at the budgets, the public information we all have regarding the budgets Netflix uses to produce content, I mean, it's been nothing but good for the business worldwide, without getting specific as to what happens in Hollywood, right? Which I don't really know. But it could be a concern, I guess. I mean, you never know. Putting the two platforms together, the ranked first and third platforms in the world, with Amazon being second. Yeah, I think there's an issue in terms of concentration there, perhaps. But at the same time, it's all going to depend on the quality of their content. No matter how big you are, you have to deliver. You have to have the right content. You have to have the right programming, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's still a lot to run on this. I think we'll see how it shapes out. And then regarding Televisa, which is the same thing that goes for anybody else that's in this world, I think Televisa has tremendous content, tremendous value. I've always thought so. I mean, even when my initial years there, where we were producing and distributing over 19 different channel brands, music, entertainment, sports, in over 60, 70 countries around the world, linear channels in over 100 countries. The actual content is being sold to other channels. And I think Televisa has a tremendous library. I know it very well. So whatever they decide in terms of standalone platform, which was started many, many years ago, or consolidating with a bigger group, I'm sure they're going to be absolutely fine, and we'll have a bunch of opportunities, either whatever they decide to do. So I think the future is bright for them, for sure, no doubt about it. So we'll see. I mean, there's definitely some tremendous opportunities for the streamers and for the producers. But we'll see what happens. So I would say over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll have a pretty good idea, what the landscape's going to look like for the next decade.
Going back to Chespirito, were you surprised about its success in the US? I mean, I guess the success in Latin America and Mexico could have been anticipated, given how strong the brand is. But in the US, did that take you by surprise at all? I mean, I think it even made it on Saturday Night Live. There was a Bad Bunny sketch, and it became a kind of trending viral moment in the US, especially around the Saturday Night Live sketch. So what was your take on that?
Yeah, I think the actual success of the series wasn't a surprise. I mean, HBO itself, they expected U.S. Hispanic to take to the show, and maybe they were surprised as to how many U.S. Hispanic households they have, and who else watched the show. I would assume 95% plus were U.S. Hispanic households. So that was nice to see. What was not expected was the how viral the show became on social media, TikTok, Instagram, throughout the summer. And that led to strange things happening, which you can't predict, like someone like Bad Bunny openly speaking about the show, openly speaking about how he was enjoying it and how he loved it. And then a few months later, he's on Saturday Night Live, who, by the way, are friends of ours. The producers of Saturday Night Live, Broadway Video, are close friends of ours. And they did a sketch about El Chavo because he wanted to do the sketch. I mean, this is something that he asked for in a way, and they wrote it, and he acted it out tremendous. One of the characters, Kiko, which he played. And then you had John Hamm as Professor Girafales. I mean, if we had tried to write that and requested that these people play these characters, it never would have happened, right? So I think that's an example of you produce content, it becomes viral, and then strange, wonderful things happen, like Bad Bunny writing and acting in a sketch on Saturday Night Live based on these beloved characters of El Chavo. It blew everybody's mind. And if you look at the amount of views on, say, just Instagram or TikTok of that sketch itself, it's, 8, 10, 20 times higher than the other normal sketches that get done on the same show, which are high anyway. So, I think not only the fact that it got done, but the amount of engagement that sketch created worldwide was just absolutely off the charts. To the delight of obviously Saturday Night Live and everybody involved, including us. So we're very happy and very surprised at that kind of thing. That was a viral moment that is absolutely zero way you can predict something like that.
And you and your fellow producers, you played no role in sort of orchestrating that. You were just happy, passive.
Yeah, I mean, we're very close to Broadway Video, produced Saturday Night Live, which is the producers, the company. So we have very good direct contact with them, but we weren't involved in writing absolutely nothing. This was all Bad Bunny basically, and the SNL writers that week. They just figured it out. It's quite amazing things that happen sometimes.
And do you think part of the success is that in this sort of globalized world where we have so many sort of generic brands that don't connect to us emotionally, people want to go back to their kind of their original sort of roots and their childhood memories? I mean, do you think if someone was to sit down with you and say, what should I do next? Would you sort of tell them, well, remember about Rosebud and about your connection to your childhood memory?
There's definitely some of that, Damien. I mean, I gave you an example. I mean, we've traveled throughout Latin America, and by far the most, as far as I can tell, the most beloved and remembered characters are characters of Chespirito. We just finished a series, an animated series for HBO that you're going to see very soon about Chapulín Colorado, which is one of the characters of Chespirito. And we were doing focus groups in Brazil with children. And we requested the focus group company to find children who had never heard of Chapulín Colorado. They couldn't do it. They couldn't find any children that hadn't heard of Chapulín Colorado. And I'm not saying about that they would know the character deeply or they understood the character, but they could pick the character out from photos. So we ended up scrapping that requirement. And we just said, get the amount of children we need in these groups, and we'll do the focus group without that requirement. And that really shocked me. I know Chespirito is very big in Brazil, but I had no idea that you could find 7, 8, 9-year-olds that knew who Chapulín Colorado was, or that you couldn't find any that didn't know who he was. That really shocked us. So it's a lot deeper than we think or know, because you have families that speak about it to their children. You still have the original program on air. In fact, after the biopic, I believe Netflix and Amazon put it on their platforms in Latin America, the original show from the 70s. So, which means the reach is now even larger than it was before. It used to be pretty much just free-to-air television, and then it became Televisa's platform. I know it was on there for a while, and now it's on a bunch of platforms, and very powerful ones, obviously, the biggest ones in the market. So, if you're going to produce content, you have an opportunity to produce content that has well-recognized characters or well-loved characters. None as big as Chespirito, in my point of view, in Latin America. I don't think you can find anything as big as that. But there are obviously a lot of other IPs and characters that are loved and well-known. I mean, if you go local, even more so. But even so, there's definitely a lot of content that could be produced and exported worldwide, and people can find new markets for their content and their IP, thanks to the reach of the platforms today, right?
Well, Bruce, thank you very much for that. Super interesting. Congratulations on the show, and really look forward to
Thanks, guys.
watching the shows going forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Anytime, my friend. Nice to meet you, Eduardo. Even though you've been frozen the whole time, but nice to meet you.
Okay,
Anytime, Damien. Let me know.
Well, that's it for this week. Everybody, thanks for staying, listening up our podcast. We'll be back next week. Please review us, share us, and comment on what Damien and I provide each week.